book we have read is appropriately called The Prince because it contains Machiavelli's rules and recommendations to the Italian princes of his day in their struggle for power. But our interest in the book, of which we have read only a few selected chapters, is somewhat different from his interest in writing it. Our interest is in what he has to say to all of us who live in America today, a free country, a republic in which there are no princes, but in which we too, each of us around this table, everyone in the United States, finds himself or herself engaged in a struggle to succeed in achieving whatever goals any of us may have in mind for ourselves. That being the case, I would like to begin by asking all of you to think of another title for this book, a title that might make it a paperback bestseller. I don't think it would sell very widely, as there are no princes, and so advice to a prince would not catch the public eye. Since it contains rules or recommendations for the conduct of life in the search for success, it is clearly a how-to book, like so many other books that are widely sold and read today. How to do what? Not how to drive a car, not how to cook a meal, not how to read a book, but how to succeed. But how to succeed in doing what? That's the question I want you all to think about. This is a book about how to succeed in doing what? I'm going around the table, starting with Lisa here. What I'd like each of you to do, and if someone has done it well enough so that you don't want to do it again, you say, I pass, I think what's been said is all right. But beginning with Lisa, going around the table, I want you to finish the sentence. The title of the book, make it as long as you want, we can cut it down later. How to succeed in, and then finish that sentence, and we'll see if we've got a title for the book that explains why it's of interest to all of us and everyone else in our country today in the life they lead. Would you try that, Lisa? How to succeed in?
In gaining power?
I mean, that's all right. When I go around, I just want to get everyone's input on this. How to succeed in?
How to succeed in gaining and keeping power.
See, he's added, that's right, isn't it? Proceed.
How to succeed in leading.
How to succeed in using, you have to remember that Alan yesterday talked about leading followers. How to succeed in being a leader, you think? Sandy?
Well, part of it was how to succeed in keeping your life, because he was saying, that you didn't want to make people upset enough that they would kill you. So I would say not in just gaining, keeping power.
You wouldn't throw that out, would you?
No, I wouldn't throw it out. I'd change it more like gaining and keeping popularity among your people.
Gaining and keeping both power and popularity. That's good. That's an addition. Tim?
I like that. That's fine.
Nothing to add to that. How to succeed in gaining and keeping both power and popularity in order to avoid being killed.
Yes, basically.
William?
Maybe add something in it that.
What would you add?
That says that being cruel isn't really cruel. I mean.
I'm not sure I understand you now, William.
All right. But you can gain power by cruelness, but
yes, by cruelty.
But if you're doing it for the good of for yourself and for everybody else, it's not really cruel. I can't put it in one word.
I see. Well, let me see if I can help you. How to succeed in gaining and keeping power, and also being popular, and avoid being cruel. You say. You think the rules include avoid being cruel.
Avoid
being cruel. You said.
Avoid seeming cruel. Maybe.
Oh, seeming cruel.
Seeming cruel.
Seeming cruel and being cruel are not the same.
Right.
I see. Laura.
I have nothing to add.
You think they're all? You think they're
Yeah, I think they're all very good.
We'll see. We'll see if that's right in a little while.
Okay.
Alan, what's your?
Because people aren't really going to rise up and take over world power. I just said how to succeed in widening and maintaining your influence over others.
Yeah.
Whether it be in your house,
There was a very successful book published when I was a young man called How to Make Friends and Influence People. Sold very widely indeed. In fact, it was one of the first great bestsellers. What's your title again?
How to succeed in widening and maintaining your influence over others.
That's, in some sense, like being a leader. I mean, a leader is
a lot. But not really being a leader. It's just having influence over those
I see.
people.
How to having influence over others. Your title?
This is the same thing, I think, It's been said, but it's just a different way. How to stay on top in today's competitive world.
Very good indeed. That's an addition. You've added two words that are good. This is a book about how to get to the top, how to get to the top, how to stay on the top in this competitive. The word competitive is very important. I'm glad. Thank you for that addition, and also the notion of at the top, not just halfway up, but at the top. Tom, any
This
addition?
may touch on William's point, how to succeed in being feared but not hated.
How to succeed in being feared but not hated. It's pretty close to William's point. Laura?
I like Buffy's, but I would say probably how to get to the top and stay. I don't know.
Well,
Something
how to
about
get to the
getting
top
there.
and stay there.
Yeah,
How to get to the top and stay there.
yeah.
Darrell?
Everything you always wanted to know about getting your act together, but were afraid to ask.
I see you've been reading paperbacks. Do that again. It's very nice.
Everything you always wanted to know about getting your act together, but were afraid to ask.
Good. The usual title is about sex, isn't it? Teresa?
I agree with Buffy and Laura. I think that
You like the word top.
I like the word top, competitive, and
Yeah.
maintaining,
Getting in
staying at the
yeah.
top,
How to get to the top, stay at the top,
and be competitive.
and be competitive in competition with others. Yes. Molden?
I agree with everything. I mean, it all has to do with being the king of the mountain.
Do you think any one of your colleagues has done a better job than do you like? There are variations here. Which one do you like best?
I like Buffy's because
like Buffy's.
it's more in tune with the way it is today.
Also, you think it's also in tune with the book, don't you? I mean, it not only has to be in tune with the way things are today, but it has to make the book relevant to the way things are today. It has to be right for Machiavelli, too, mustn't it? Yes, Chris?
I'd say how to succeed in controlling people and keeping them happy about it.
That's interesting. How to succeed in controlling people, which means being at the top and having power over them, but making them happy about your doing it. In other words, not being hated and not being thought cruel. So that, yes? Maria?
I think everything that's been said is said it all.
You're satisfied with that, all right? How about you, Todd?
I was going to say the same thing basically Chris said.
Well, of course, at the end of this long line, you're in a bad position. Now, let me see if I can put together, see if I can try a version that sums all this up. How to succeed in any worldly enterprise, how to succeed in any worldly enterprise in which you're in competition with others for power to get it and keep it. My title leaves out the word top, which is very important. How to succeed in getting to the top in competition with others in a worldly enterprise. I put the words in a worldly enterprise because not all occupations, I'll come back to this in a moment, involve this kind of success. But when you're in competition with others in a worldly enterprise, such as business or any profession, just think of it for a moment now, that's a worldly enterprise because you're involved in, there are some things that, as you'll see in a moment, that don't involve you in competition with others. So the notion of competition with others is very important, Buffy, and getting to the top in competition with others. And some of the other things you said will come out in a moment. Now, if that's the general sense of the book, that's a how-to book, how to succeed book in this kind of thing, would you tell me, and think a moment with this, you're all going to have different occupations. Are the occupations, the professions, the walks of life which you've chosen for yourself after you graduate from college, are they occupations or walks of life or professions in which you will want to succeed in competition with others to get to the top? Are the walks of life you've chosen for yourself ones in which you'll be interested in succeeding in competition with others to get to the top? How many of you say yes to that question? Is there anyone who says, no, I've chosen a profession for myself where I don't want to succeed in getting to the top?
I would rather not compete than to compete like this.
Can you tell us what your image of your future is that follows this up?
Well, I don't know what I want. I don't know what my occupation will be, but when thinking about it, I probably wouldn't want to compete like this. the way he talks about it
You'd not
here.
like to be in that kind of a rat race.
Yeah, it's pretty fierce to me.
Well, two of you don't want to be in the rat race. All of you want to be. Can you think, let me ask you to imagine now, what, in general, what professions or occupations or walks of life might people choose in order to avoid being in this rat race of the struggle for power and competition with others? What walks of life, I'm really asking, what walks of life or occupations or professions does Machiavelli's rules and recommendations or this how-to book not apply? Is my question clear? Yes.
To teaching,
Teaching. You mean there's no struggle for power in the academic profession?
I don't really see a...
You haven't been around long enough. Yes?
I was gonna say philosophy.
Well, yeah, yeah, very good. You're quite right. Thank you very much. I think, I'm glad you mentioned that. But when you say that, you could name a whole series. You could say being a poet as well as being a philosopher, or being a painter, or being a musician. That is, if you aren't trying to succeed on the concert stage, but simply you want to write music. If I want to write philosophical books, I'm not competing with anyone else for the struggle for power, am I? Teaching is, if you go to the educational profession, you might want to get to the top. You might want to become a principal, a superintendent, or secretary of education, might you not? Might you not?
You might.
But wouldn't also a poet want to write a bestseller of his collection of books?
He might want to do that, but he might not. A poet who's simply pleased to write poetry and have it published would be another kind
Teacher
of...
would be on the same
Yeah.
note.
Yes.
Yeah, not all teachers have the strive to become
That's right. You could be a
superintendent,
teacher
because
without...
if they're a teacher because they like to teach,
That's
then they'll
right.
be happy with
That's
that,
right.
too.
So that when you think of some, you can think of professions in which you could avoid this
Yes.
kind of competition.
If you truly enjoyed teaching, then
But
there
you
would be
wouldn't
no
think
struggle
business was
for
that
power.
kind of profession, would you?
No.
Alan, you were going to...
Well, I wasn't really going to say anything, but I think that if you're going to compete, you'll compete no matter in what profession you take. And if you don't want to compete, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you could own a corner grocery store, which is a business. And in business, I mean, obviously you have to compete a little more, but you don't really have to be in that
But if you
rat race
got a job with a large corporation and wanted to get to the top, you'd be in that kind of...
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh, I think you've got the sense of what this book applies to and what this book doesn't apply to. And what I want you to think about all the way through is stop thinking about this as advice to a prince in Florence in the struggle for political power, and think of it more broadly, because I want it to apply to your lives and my life and everybody else's life who may be engaged in the struggle, competitive struggle, to get to the top and stay there. Now then, let me ask you another question. The word Machiavelli's name has become an adjective. People speak of a person being a Machiavellian character, or having Machiavellian tricks, or tactics, or doing Machiavellian things. Have you ever, I wouldn't be surprised if you said no to this, but have any of you ever used the word Machiavellian? Have you ever called anybody Machiavellian? You have. Anybody else? 2, 3. Anybody else? Let me take you 3. So when you call, now listen to the question carefully, please, Tom. When you call somebody Machiavellian, are you praising him or criticizing, blaming him?
When I used it in my context, it was praising him.
Praising. You think being Machiavellian is being good.
Mm-hmm.
And you?
It was more respect.
You have respect for him if he's being Machiavellian. And you?
I was criticizing.
You're criticizing him. Would you explain to your 2 colleagues why you differ from them in your sense of the meaning of the adjective Machiavellian?
Well, I use the adjective in describing the dictator of Argentina, Juan Perón, and he was ruthless, and everything that I had known about him or researched about him made me think that he was a ruthless leader, that he did what he had to do to stay in power and to...
That's why you call him Machiavellian? That's a term of disrepute, not a
Yes.
term of respect or honor. Well, what's your reply to that, Darrell? You understand what Chris has just said? Don't you think? Why do you use the term Machiavellian as a term of praise?
It was somebody in one of my clubs wanted to get something done, and he kind of tricked, kind of led people on to helping him at first and then giving them responsibility. And I respected the fact that he wanted something done, and he eventually got it done.
Mm-hmm. And you?
I used it in a term paper to describe an emperor in saying that he used a Machiavellian trait by keeping the people happy in various shows and good economic policies.
Well, let me broaden this up now, then. I'd like you to raise your hands on this or speak out. In recent history, by reading the newspapers or the magazines or seeing news releases on TV, your acquaintance with the world, do you know, would you name to me some persons well known to all of us in the world today whom you would call Machiavellian? Yes.
Ronald Reagan?
Ronald Reagan. Anyone else?
Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher. Anyone else?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Well, why do you say Donald Trump?
Because he manipulates the
real estate market.
The government in New York, and tries to make as if he is doing good for the people, and actually gets what he wants done without actually benefiting too many people.
Anybody else? Any more names of Machiavellian characters? Yes?
I said Don Reagan.
Don
Reagan.
Don Reagan. Yeah. Not President Reagan. I mean the present Chief of Staff.
Chief of Staff.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Yes?
What about that Iacocca, the car man?
Iacocca. Huh?
Oh, yeah.
You think he's Machiavellian?
Well, he's got all this power, and he kept it. So I would say that he knows how to use it to his benefit.
There's another businessman. I can't think of his name. He was convicted of drugs not so long ago.
DeLorean. None of you mentioned Hitler. None of you mentioned Mussolini. None of you mentioned Nixon. None of you mentioned.
They're all the failures, though.
Oh, you think they're bad Machiavellians?
They lost.
That's very interesting. But they were Machiavellian, weren't they? But not good enough.
Right.
In other words, you think Hitler was Machiavellian, but not a good enough Machiavellian.
He didn't stay
That
at
Nixon
the
was
top.
Machiavellian, but not a good enough. Yes?
One I was thinking of was Ferdinand Marcos, but I thought, well, he's kept the people happy for a time, but now he seems to be slipping. So he's falling away from the Machiavellian because
He would be the examples Machiavelli would use to show who isn't, I think.
Yeah. Well, I didn't ask you which persons were effective or successful Machiavellians. I asked you whether they were Machiavellian in their tactics, whether they used them well enough and succeeded or not. You would include Mussolini and Hitler as being Machiavellian in their strategies and tactics, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yes.
And you mentioned, who mentioned Reagan? You mentioned Reagan. You'd include Nixon, wouldn't you? Oh, well, you wouldn't because he failed, I guess.
Well, he is. He was a hypocrite, so I guess, he had to. He said one thing and did another, so he must be.
Well, shouldn't a Machiavellian character say one thing and do another?
Yeah, that's why I'm agreeing with you.
What?
Said yes.
How many would you, let me start off with George Washington. You wouldn't call George Washington a Machiavellian. Among the presidents of the United States, Roman.
No.
You wouldn't call George Washington Machiavellian. How many presidents of the United States, I don't know how many you know, but if you think about it, how many presidents of the United States do you think you'd include in the group called Machiavellian characters? Yes?
Lincoln.
Lincoln? Lincoln. Not Washington, but Lincoln. Why Lincoln?
Lincoln was, in his, as a president, he was a very strong president. He manipulated Congress. Through the Civil War, he was able to gain more power, executive power, and some of it really wasn't under the Constitution, but no one really opposed him.
Anyone else? Any other presidents you'd like to name as Yes?
Roosevelt.
Right one.
I think Teddy Roosevelt's more of
Who?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt. You think he was more Machiavellian than Franklin? Why?
Because he showed the power of being a leader in going down to Cuba.
You
I mean, not
realize
just
when you
as-
call these presidents Machiavellian, you're saying that they do some underhanded things. Because you can't be Machiavellian and be entirely above board, can you? Right? All right. Now then, with that as a general background, you think one of the rules for being a Machiavellian is to be avoid being hated. If you had to choose between being hated or feared, which would you choose?
I would choose being feared.
That's what Machiavelli recommends, does he not?
Yes, sir.
If you have to choose between being hated, and as opposed to being feared and loved, should you be hated or loved by the people?
Be loved by the people.
Loved by the people, and also feared.
Feared by the people.
What is Machiavelli's recommendation with respect to whether or not, in this struggle for power, you make promises? Should you keep your promises? Should you keep your promises, the promises you make?
You should be able to keep them, but not.
What does Machiavelli say on this point about keeping promises?
Don't keep your promises when it doesn't suit your end.
That's precisely it. And as a matter of fact, when you think of the number of promises most presidents make when they adopt a party platform to be elected, most of which they don't actually then execute when they become presidents, most of the candidates for our presidency have seldom kept their promises, have they? They've made them, but when they don't suit their purposes after they become president, they don't keep them, do they? That's very good Machiavellian procedure. Make good promises. Make promises that give you an advantage, but don't keep them if it doesn't suit your purpose, correct? How about the business? Is it important in Machiavelli's terms to have the people with you, have the people behind you? Yes. No. Is it important to have a lot of friends and sort of followers?
Yeah.
Let me ask you to take the back of a piece of paper there for a moment and write down, if you would, the following words: force of numbers, force of arms, cunning or guile, friends or adherents.
Friends or what?
Friends or adherents. The reputation for being virtuous, the reputation for appearing to be virtuous, actually being virtuous. Now look at those 6 things. I want to read you one text from Machiavelli while you look at that, because I introduced 2 words there that have not come out of the text so far. It's in the 2nd paragraph of chapter 18. No, don't have to bother to look at it. I'll read it to you, in which he says, it's important for the prince to know how well to be both the beast and the man. And then he goes on to say, a prince, being thus obliged to know well how to act as a beast, must imitate the fox and the lion. For the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. That's cunning. The fox has cunning, and the lion has strength. Okay? So now, you look at those 6 items. If you had to rank them, if you had to say which is the most important for a Machiavellian character to be, to have the people behind him, have powerful arms, be cunning, have friends and adherents, have the reputation for virtue, actually being virtuous. Which would you say which 1 or 2 would you say was the most important, Tim?
Probably say cunning.
Cunning.
Because if you're cunning, you can probably get the other things.
Cunning. Which would you say, Laura P? Laura O? Yeah.
Well, I really haven't decided. I guess I'd have to agree with
Which would
it.
you say, Alan?
I said cunning.
Which would you say?
Cunning.
Cunning? You, Todd?
Cunning.
Cunning? Yes.
I would say force of numbers.
Force of numbers. What would you say?
I'd say real close to cunning would be reputation of appearing virtuous.
Appearing virtuous. Did any? Yes, Chris?
I agreed with Sandy because I thought that reputation for appearing virtuous would back up your cunning, because
Yeah.
you may not be...
But which one did you put last?
Being
Friends.
virtuous.
Being virtuous. Anyone disagree with that? Now that's the essence of the point. All understand that appearing to be virtuous is very important. Being virtuous not important at all, right? Now when you understand that, I will now try to give you the general rule. I'll see if I can formulate, you've all contributed something, the rule of Machiavellian procedure. It goes something like this. I'm going to read you 2 texts and then see if I can say it in my own words. In one text, in chapter 15, he says, a man, it's the bottom of the 1st paragraph in chapter 15, a man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything, a man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. Therefore, it is necessary for a prince We can substitute it for anyone who's in competition to get to the top in the struggle for power competitively. It's necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain himself to learn how not to be good and to use this knowledge or not use it according to the necessity of the case. And another statement that's somewhat like that, again, that summarizes the basic Machiavellian rule, policy, is at the bottom of the page 93 in chapter 18, where he says, and therefore the prince, and I say again, anyone who's struggling competitively with others to get to the top in a profession, a corporation, in politics, in a hospital, I don't care what it is, anyone who is doing this must have a mind, he says, disposed to adapt itself according to the winds. And as the variations of fortune dictate, he must not deviate from what is good if possible, but be able to do evil if constrained. He must not deviate from what is good if possible, but be able to do evil if necessary. So the rule is something like this. In the struggle for success, to get to the top, use any means, fair or foul, do whatever is expedient, whether it's good or not. Be good if you can be. But if you can't, if being good is not expedient, won't help you to succeed, be bad. Is that clear? Be good if you can be. Be good if it's possible. Be virtuous if it serves your purpose. But if it's expedient, expedient means serves your purpose. If it's expedient or serves your purpose to be bad, be prepared to be bad. Do evil. Is that clear? Is the rule clear? Yes. All right. Now that's the rule. Along with the rule, Machiavelli, in the passages I read, says two other things that I want to call your attention to now. He expresses his opinion of mankind. I want to read you the text in which he expresses his opinion of what human beings are like, and ask you how you interpret that text. One is, again, back in chapter 15. I'm almost going to read the same sentence and call your attention to other words now. A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. He's saying many human beings are not good. In the other text, in the other chapter, 18, he says, if men were all good, my rules, my precept would not be a good one. But as they are bad and would not observe their faith with you, so you are not bound to keep faith with them. He first says, so many human beings are bad. Here he's saying that, but as most men are bad. And then a little further down on the same page, he says, it is not necessary for a prince to have all the above-named or virtuous qualities, but it is very necessary for the prince or the person struggling for power to seem to have them. I would even be so bold to say that to possess them, to possess the virtues, and always to observe them is dangerous, but to appear to possess them is useful. Thus, it is good to seem, notice the word seem, it is good to seem merciful, seem faithful, seem humane, seem sincere, seem religious, and also to be so. But you must have the mind so disposed that when it is needful to be otherwise, you may be able to change to the opposite qualities. Now, which of the following three things do you think Machiavelli is saying? I'll take any one of the three. All men, and the word men means man and woman, man means human being, all human beings, all men are bad. Always. Or most men are always bad. Or, the least extreme, most men are for the most part bad. Let me repeat the three again. All men are always bad. Most men are always bad. Most men are for the most part, not always, for the most part bad. Which of those three would you like to take as the statement of Machiavelli's view of what mankind is like? How about that, Laura? Which would you take?
I would take the last one.
Most men are for the most part bad. Which would you take, Tim?
Last one.
And you?
The last.
How about you?
Last one.
So you all would like to take the most moderate one. Most men are for the most part bad. All right, now I'm going to go to the board over here and explain the board, and I'm going to ask you all to vote. Look at this diagram. There are 4 lines on the diagram. 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you vote on this, all you have to do is put down on a piece of paper Roman 1, Roman 2, Roman 3, Roman 4. This column says matters of fact. This column expresses Machiavelli's opinion of mankind, and you've chosen to say his opinion of mankind is most men are for the most part bad. That's your decision. Over here is Machiavelli's statement of policy, which is, in your attempt to get to the top, in competition with other men, in your struggle for success to reach the top, use any means, be unscrupulous, fair and foul, be good if you can be, but if it's expedient to be bad, be bad. Understand the principle? Those are the facts. Most men are for the most part bad. Be good if you can be, but be bad if you have to be, if it's expedient to be bad in order to succeed. That clear? Line 1 says, because Machiavelli is right, that's true, because Machiavelli is right in his view of mankind, his policy is sound. Is that clear? Because, line 1 says, because Machiavelli is correct in thinking that most men are for the most part bad, his policy of saying, be unscrupulous, to be expedient. Use good means if you can, but bad means if you have to. Line 2 says, even though, notice between because and even though it is true that most men are for the most part bad, his policy is unsound. Clear? This says, even though it is false, even though it is not true that most men are for the most part bad, nevertheless, his policy is sound. And line 4 says, because it is false, because most men are not for the most part bad, his policy is unsound. Now, before you vote, I want to be sure you understand those 4 lines. I'll repeat them because understanding the 4 lines is of the greatest importance. Do you understand what the 4 lines say?
There's basically 2 questions. One according to Machiavelli and one according to us.
I'm only asking, let me say it once.
Okay.
No question that Machiavelli is on line 1. So where Machiavelli is clear. He is saying, because I think I'm right, that most men are for the most part bad, the book says that. Therefore,
okay, I see what you're saying.
So I don't want, if you agree with Machiavelli, you're on line 1. But you could be on line 2, 3, or 4, couldn't you?
Okay, I see.
So you think about your own opinion now. Is that clear? Any question? All right. Now, what we'll do, I want to do this carefully. I'd like to keep track of where you stand on this. I'll just put down 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'd like to know first, how many of you were on line 1? Hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many of you are on line 2? 1. How many of you are on line 3? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many on line 4? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I think what we must do now is to have you argue with one another. I would like to have, the one, you were on line 1.
Oh,
No, line 2. Would you please explain yourself? You're the greatest minority. You're stand by yourself, which is perfectly all right. A minority of 1 may be right against everybody else. So tell me why you think let's repeat again what line 2 says. It says, even though it is true that most men are for the most part bad, Machiavelli's policy is unsound. I wouldn't follow it in order to succeed. Is that correct? Explain yourself.
There really isn't much to say except that,
It must be you have to have reasons for taking that position.
well, I believe that most men are for the most part bad.
You don't mean men now, do you? You mean human beings, don't you?
Human beings, yes. Right.
I want to be sure you weren't talking about males.
I'm not talking about males.
I see.
I mean human beings.
Yeah.
But I believe that you're no better than they are if you follow the same
But
principles.
the question, you're saying, you're forgetting the second part of the statement. I understand that you think that most men are for the most part bad, but why, even though that is the case, do you think Machiavelli's rule of success, recommendations for how to do it, is unsound? That's what you just said. Unsound. Why is it unsound?
Well, it depends on what you mean by unsound. The way I'm taking it,
Unsound means it wouldn't work.
it would not work. Okay, well
Unsound means it
then,
wouldn't
then
work.
I change my,
Oh, what did you mean by unsound?
I'm an unsound as in I would not follow that principle because I don't think that's right.
Then you don't want to succeed. Yeah, look,
I think there are other ways to succeed, but I think his would work also.
then you aren't on line two.
Okay, I guess I changed my position.
Where would
then.
you like to move to?
I would move to line 1. It's sound, but I would not follow it.
Then I'm going to keep following you now. Because you say it's sound, but you wouldn't follow it because you don't want to get involved in the rat race. Hence, you must have chosen for yourself a life in which you're not going to compete with others to get to the top.
No, that's not true because I don't think his is the only way to succeed. I think there are other ways.
Oh, I see.
His would work, but I don't think it's the only way.
Even though most men are for the most part bad.
Right.
And would you tell me the opposite way? I want to be sure I understand you now because you're saying something very extraordinary. You say you think you could succeed in a world, competing in a world with other human beings who are for the most part bad, even though your conduct was in every way good. You would not try to merely appear to be virtuous, you would be virtuous. You would not be expedient, merely expedient. You'd always be just and honest and keep your promises and do everything you said you were going to do.
As much as possible, yes.
And you think you could succeed that way?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
She just said as much as possible, and that's kind of what he said.
Well, no, I don't mean, by that I mean that I'm not infallible. I mean that I would make
we'll grant you
mistakes, but
that.
as much as possible, I would try to do what was right.
Those of you who where were the 4 Machiavellians on line 1? What do you think about, Buffy? What do you think about Laura?
I know even as much as I try, I'll never do everything I say because I've done things where I've had to lead before, and you have to lie. You can't keep all of the people happy all of the time. It's just impossible, you know. And so you let people think.
You think if Laura tried to, in a world in which she agrees
Both
that
people
most,
would end up not liking her, you know, because
you think Laura wouldn't succeed?
no, depends on what she does. You
Who
know,
else
if
is
she's a
on line
doctor,
1?
then I guess.
What do you think about Laura's point?
I don't think she would succeed at all. If you were perfectly honest, how could you lead a whole group of people? I mean, because like you said, every man isn't honest. So there'll be always somebody out there trying to take her position. You know?
Who else was on line 1? Yes, please, Sherry.
I think that she has a view that's kind of dreamy because it can't really happen that way because there's people around you that are bad.
Right.
So you have to do
She's
bad things.
admitting that most people
Right,
are.
right.
Most people, she's
But
saying.
yet she's saying she's going to be honest, and she can't be honest if somebody's not being honest with her.
No, she can be if she doesn't want to
Okay,
succeed.
right, if she doesn't want to succeed.
Point is, if she wants to get out of the rat race,
Okay.
doesn't want to struggle in competition with others to succeed to get to the top, then she can get out.
That's true.
See?
But
But
she
she
said
says
she
she wants to
wanted to.
succeed
And
in
she
the rat
wants-
race, right?
Well, yes, I would like to succeed. I don't know that I would necessarily. Okay, I'll put it this way. I don't want to succeed to the point that I would do anything to get it.
In other words, now you made a very qualified statement, and you say, I will only succeed if I can succeed by being honest and virtuous.
Okay,
If I can't, I don't want to
That's
succeed.
my position, right.
I'd like to come to line 4. Line 4 interests me a great deal. I'll come back to 10 in a moment. Line 4 says, I'll come back to you in a moment. Line 4 says, it is false. It is not true that most men are for the most part bad. On the contrary, most men are for the most part good, and that's the reason why it's unsound. That's your position, is it? Will you explain yourself?
Well, Roman numeral 1 and 2 paint a pretty grim picture of the world, I think. And I think it's kind of a, not really a true picture. I think for the most part, most people are good. That there's just a few bad people out there.
Just a few?
Just a few.
And therefore, you don't have to, since there are only a few bad people out there, you don't have to be bad yourself in order to succeed.
Right.
Do you think, would you like to try to persuade Laura, make her happy by saying that she has a wrong view of mankind? Tell her why you think she's wrong in agreeing that most men are for the most part bad. You obviously I'll take the opposite view.
Maybe I'm naive, but from what I've encountered in man, I think man is just naturally good in that evil is something that happens to him after birth. It's something that after
That's around him, not
that's
inside.
around him, and that influences him to be evil. And that for the most part they're good.
Who else is on line 4? Yes, please, Mark.
Well, I think you can just look around you and see that most people aren't evil. Look at us. I mean, I know we're a selection.
Are you including Buffy?
Yeah, but Buffy's on line 1, and she was class president for 3 years.
It's starting to make me wonder, too.
I
know. The true
I
colors are
just think
coming
you're
out.
trying to be too ideal to think that man is always going to be good,
How
and
can you
that's
say
that's
he's
why
mostly
I
bad,
voted
though?
number 1 because
You
I
said
know.
he's mostly bad.
Yeah,
Well, you must love these.
I'm not
You
saying
look at
bad
somebody
as
and
in
say,
going out and murdering someone. I mean bad as like
I know what
you're,
you mean.
Everything's
Your
not honest.
morals. You're no
Said-
man. It's gonna go well. I know I can make this company venture and make tons of money, but since I'm a good person, I'm not going to make another person go bankrupt.
But you said
You know,
most men
something
are
like that.
mostly bad.
That's what I mean as being bad.
But I don't consider that
Man
bad.
is basically out for himself, and I agree. I know that.
Exactly.
I could
I'm
be
not
so
myself.
wrong, and
You
everyone
said
go
most
laughing.
men are mostly bad. That means that
Most
more
people,
than half the men
That's
are
right.
more than half bad.
yeah.
I don't know how
When
you
I
can
say
say that.
bad, Mark, I mean bad as in
I know what you
wanting
mean. I
to-
mean bad,
Well,
like
bad
having
means-
evil thoughts.
Bad means departing from good actions. Bad means being villainous, being a knave, being dishonest, being unscrupulous, being unjust. That's bad. Is the opposite of being virtuous. Bad means the opposite of being virtuous.
So my
Sandy,
number 3.
Okay, do you want
you're on line 4,
line
right?
4 also? Yes. Saying that most people are not mostly bad.
Yeah.
For same reason, Mark's reason. I
Yeah.
can see Buffy's reasoning too, but I guess it's her difference of bad is what's making her point.
Well, you understand bad to be some departure from virtue, don't you?
Yeah, but
Okay, but she's saying
You
that.
do
my
understand
bad is
bad.
as bad as your bad.
There are, of course, degrees of badness.
Yeah.
Killing a lot of people is very bad indeed.
Yeah,
But there are other ways of being bad. Whenever you tell a lie to trick somebody, you're being bad, aren't you?
Yeah.
Whenever you deceive anybody, you're bad. Whenever you make a promise and don't keep it, you're being bad. And that's right, isn't it? Well, that's
where I am.
sufficient. Go ahead.
Why I picked line 4 was I believe, that most men are not mostly bad.
Yeah.
And if that was the case, then if you used Machiavelli's policy
Yeah.
of being cruel if you have to, if men aren't mostly bad and he's cruel when he has to be, first of all, he wouldn't have to be cruel.
That's right.
But if he felt that he had to be, if he felt that he had to be cruel, then the people would be totally dissatisfied with his policy, and it wouldn't work.
Wouldn't work. That's why you call it unsound.
Yes.
Tim, were you on the same? Were you on 5 too?
Yeah, line 4, yes.
Line 4, yes. And anything to add?
I agree with Mark and Sandy. I think it's people like Machiavelli who create the evil. If people followed this, if we declared this sound and people started following this precept, then it would just get worse.
Considering the fact that men are not mostly bad, that
Right.
is.
Anyone else on line 4 that hasn't? Yes. And you want to come back? Yeah. Proceed, Teresa.
Well, I agree with all 4 of them over there. And I think to help Laura in the sense is to think if she thinks that it's unsound, she would have to say, agree with line 4, because if man is not altogether bad, is what you're saying, right? Then you'd have to agree with either line 3 or line 4. But if you agree with line 4, you'd have to say that Machiavelli's
Is unsound.
policy was unsound.
And Chris?
Well, I'm on line 3, but I was agreeing with the first point, with that man is mostly good.
For the most part, good.
Within the limits of his humanity.
Yeah.
Because man makes mistakes.
Sure, making a
And
mistake,
I think-
making a mistake is not being bad.
Right, I think they're mistaking to some degree the mistakes for
As
evil,
for
for
mistakes.
badness.
Moral evil is being intentionally vicious, being intentionally a scoundrel, being intentionally a knave, dishonest. So that is making a mistake. Is unintentional wrongdoing is not wrongdoing. I'm most interested in the fact that 10 of you, the great majority of you, I'll come back to the 4 Machiavellians last, 4 of you on line 1, but 10 of you are on line 3. Let me repeat line 3. I want to understand line 3. Those of you who are on line 3 are saying, we disagree with Machiavelli. You were saying, we disagree with Machiavelli. We think he's wrong in thinking that most men are for the most part bad. We think most men are for the most part good. Nevertheless, we think Machiavelli's policies are sound. Hear what you just said? Even though we think that Machiavelli is wrong about human nature, we ourselves take the opposite view, that most men are for the most part good. Nevertheless, we think his policy, being unscrupulous, being bad if necessary, being what is expedient rather than virtuous, is sound. That's what you've said on line 3. Can I see the hands again on line 3? What about, well, how do you take that? I'm going to go around the room on that one.
Well, I can't force myself to believe that man is by nature bad.
I understand. It's the second part of the thing that worries me.
But yet I still think that there is, by stepping on people's toes and by hurting the good people if necessary, then you can get to the top. That does work in today's society. But I still think that people aren't all bad.
Would you go so far to say that Machiavelli's, if I understand you, would you go so far as to say, it may affect the rest of what you say, that it's precisely because most people are good that the policy of being bad, if you have to be, works. If they were all bad, it wouldn't work as well as it's better to be a thief among honest people than a thief among thieves, isn't it?
Right, because you stand out more.
No. A thief among thieves can be stolen from, can't it?
Right.
But a thief among honest people can keep his...
Seen.
Yeah. Are you on that line?
Yes, first of all, I took line 3 because I said that all people are
For the
some
most-
part.
For the most
some
part,
good.
Or some part bad, but for the most part, good.
Yeah, and when they're bad is when they're trying to get ahead.
I see.
So when you can be bad, and use Machiavellian techniques to get ahead, and that is why it would work.
Mm-hmm. What's your reason?
Okay, I agree with Greg a lot because in order to succeed, you have to do some things that are not virtuous. Like he says, hate. He says, it's better not to be hated.
Yeah.
Just as a good man, if you were bad, you'd be disliked more.
Yeah.
And it stands out better, I think, over good people. If you're bad some of the time, just like what you said, then you'll stand out and you will succeed.
Mm-hmm. You on that line? No, you're not. Yes,
I just want to ask him a question.
Please.
Would you rather be bad to good people than to be good to them? I'm going to have to watch myself here.
Well, I have something to say about that.
I mean, you'd rather do policy 3 than something else?
We're not talking about what we would rather.
No, they're saying now that if you get yourself into the rat race of competition with others in order to get to the top, even though most men are for the most part good, it's Machiavelli's recommendations are wise, pragmatic, expedient.
So they would do them.
Yeah,
So they're the bad.
That's what they're saying. Who else is on? I'm going around the room. Who else is on? I'll come back to you. Who else is on line 3? Next.
Oh, I am.
Are you
You on line 3?
Yeah, I'm on line 3.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you on line 3?
I'm on line 3.
You have to wake her up.
I agree with especially what Dan says about people being good. I agree that most people are good. And how I support that most people being good use evil to get their way in life is that if we have everybody here as we're all basically good, a few of us are a little evil, and I want to rise above everybody and take over this seminar, then okay, one thing, if you overstep people, how can you overstep someone that is good without finding an inside means to get over top of them? If we're all good and we all use good means, each good mean is going to cancel out each other.
So among a lot of people who are good, the fellow who's willing to use bad means will get ahead.
Yes, because he's got to use a little something extra to get above everybody who's all good.
I see. That's interesting. Are you on that line?
Yes.
What's
I
your...
think if you're trying to move up, you're going to encounter more good people than you will bad people. And just because they're good, you don't have to be bad to them. Like he says, you should be good most of the time. The good people will respect virtues and honesty and things like that. And you can use good virtues and get ahead with the good people. But when you run into the bad apples, that 20 out of 100, there's no way you're going to be good and get anywhere. You're only going to get cut down. The only way to deal, there's some people you can't deal with, honestly, because they're not honest. The only way to deal with them is to be unscrupulous and step on their toes.
I see. Buffy, you online?
So you don't just step on the toes of the bad people?
You have to, yes.
Who is next on line 3? Yes, please.
Alan summed it up pretty well, because just that the passage that you marked was that not to deviate from what is good if possible.
Yeah.
Because if I believe that.
But be bad if necessary.
Right. Be bad if necessary. As long as you can stay good, be good. But to take over the people that are bad, then keep the people from being bad. You got to do a little bit of bad yourself.
I see.
If you're going to succeed.
Who else is on? Yes?
But I still believe that, most people are good. But if you want something done, you have to manipulate people, because even though they're good, they're not going to want the same thing that you do. So you have to manipulate them to get what you want done.
So if you get into the rat race, which is this competitive struggle for power and to get to the top, even in a population, in any society in which you move, in which most people are for the most part good, you have to be prepared to be bad to succeed.
Because real power is not something somebody gives you. You got to take it from them.
How about you? Where were you, Teresa? You weren't on.
Line 4.
And Moulton?
Yeah, I'm on line 3. And,
yes.
Well, since I'm at the end of this long line, I agree with what everybody says, that, especially Dan, that majority of men are good, but they're capable of being bad.
Yeah.
And what Alan said about the policy, using good if it's to your own advantage, but if you have to use bad, because that's the way it is, like as Lisa said today.
Where were you, Chris? Yeah.
I'm on line 3.
Yeah.
I'm arguing that Machiavelli is sound. That's not what I agree with. I think that because most men are good, that's really the beauty of his theory.
Yeah.
Because a Machiavellian is not what he appears to be. If he appears to be virtuous and appears to be honest, that's an advantage over the good, because they will take him at face value.
Yeah. And if I understand you, then, when we say that Nixon, for example, is an example of a poor Machiavellian, he didn't succeed in appearing to be virtuous. That is, one of the hardest things in the world is be not virtuous and appear to be virtuous. Very important to seem good, because when you appear not virtuous, you get enemies, you get hated, and you come to an end, as Hitler did and Mussolini did.
And the majority of the good people realized that they weren't right.
So it's very hard. In other words, if I understand this, it is very, very hard to be a good Machiavellian, be bad while appearing to be virtuous.
Right.
You understand that now, Buffy? Being bad while always appearing to be virtuous. Where do you stand, Maria?
I'm line 1.
You're line. And where were you, Todd?
Line 10.
Line 3. Line 3. You would be 10 on line 3.
Yeah.
What about line 3?
Well, I basically agree with what Alan said. If you're a good person, if you're surrounded by mainly good people, then if you all use decent, honest methods to get to a certain level, then that's okay. But like Alan said, there are a few bad apples out there, and some of them are in their way. And in order to compete with them, you have to use
They're all on line 1.
Well, appearing to be good. Yes?
All these people say this, that would mean they're unvirtuous. All 10 of these people are unvirtuous then if they use these means. Because it's Machiavelli says that. He says appear virtuous but be unvirtuous. So all 10 of you are unvirtuous. And you're just saying that.
If we wanted to get to the top.
All of you put up your hands and said you wanted to, though.
Sandy?
Okay, I'd like to try to defend line 4 again, using Alan's on line 3, where he was talking about, the 20 bad apples out of 100, okay?
Yeah.
That I think saying that the policy is sound is a bit, I don't know if I can use the word idealistic, because how do you know that, okay, you're saying that you have to be bad to those 20 people, right, Alan? But you can be good to the rest of the people, right?
Yes.
Okay. How do you know that when you're being bad, you aren't being bad to 80 out of the 100 people? It's saying that you're going to be good only to the good people.
No,
Bad. Okay.
The policy says,
Okay, but when I'm...
policy says that you should be good wherever you can succeed by being good, be good. But if you can't succeed by being good and can succeed by being bad, then be bad, because being bad, unvirtuous, is expedient. That's what the policy is, right?
Okay, yes.
And what are you saying now?
I'm saying that I just don't think that it's going to work, because you're going to end up being being bad to the good people, and they're going to really resent you for that.
Remember now, you're forgetting that the rule says when you're bad, appear to be good. Don't be bad appearing to be bad. When you're not virtuous, always try to appear virtuous. The reason why most Machiavellians don't succeed is they're not virtuous and are caught. You've got to deceive people. You've got to be unvirtuous while appearing to be virtuous. That's the rule. You follow me?
I suppose, but I don't agree with it.
Alan's saying that it's unnecessary with good people to be wrong, to be bad with them, because they're good and they'll respect your good, and that way the good will work together.
Right.
Yes, Alan?
And another thing, that's what I was going to say about the good people, but about the bad people. I mean, you can't tell me that if you're driving down the road and the Hells Angels pull up beside you and they stop you, that you're going to get out of your car and explain to them that they shouldn't kill you and rape your wife because you're a good guy.
You can't be so perfect as lying.
I know.
I
See,
don't
and also we talked about yesterday. I mean, if the Hells Angels pulled me over, I'm not going to get pulled over in the first place. If I got out of the car, I'd sure have a gun with me. But the second thing is, we talked about yesterday that you can be virtuous and you can be temperate and still exhibit acts of non-temperance and non-virtue on a given occasion, as if you're pulled over by the Hells Angels. If you shot them, nobody's gonna, say you're wrong in doing that. And that's what I mean. I'm not saying that you can run around rampantly and just do all the bad you want to the good people. I say that you should be good to the good people, and you'll go a lot farther. And if you run
We said yesterday that self-defense was virtuous, and that's self-defense.
Self-defense is justifiable.
Right, but we said it was virtuous yesterday.
Right, yeah.
So in other words,
that's virtuous.
Yeah, Alan's bad is
So
virtuous.
bad is virtue.
No, I'm sorry, Alan. That doesn't work. Yes, Teresa? Yes, Teresa? Yes?
I just wanted to ask Darrell. He said if we wanted to succeed.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, all 10 of you put up your hands and said you wanted to succeed in life.
You really have them there.
And if you said that, then you must be unvirtuous, because...
Well, I'm saying that if
and
in
you
my
said you would,
self-righteous
though.
self, as someone else we know, and I decide that this is what I want and this is what would be good for everybody else, then I'm going to start manipulating people.
The good people.
See, but
Right.
so you're unvirtuous.
You're
saying that.
you're willing to be...
Yeah.
You're saying you're unvirtuous.
What I want, yeah.
Chris?
Don't lump him in with me.
Wait a moment.
You're saying you're unvirtuous.
Chris
I can't believe it.
Chris and Teresa. Teresa first.
Okay, did we say then that Nixon put on his facade that he was
Nixon
virtuous?
Committed a whole series of acts that were not virtuous,
But he
got caught. He did not, while doing it, he did not appear to most of us to be virtuous.
See, okay, now if we look at that if you're good, you'll be successful, and then if we look at it that if you're bad, like Hitler was bad, considering evil.
Yeah.
Hitler committed evils.
Lots of it.
And Nixon
Committed some.
committed some also.
Both got
Now, if
caught.
we're going to say that his Machiavelli's policy is sound, then these men, even though they put on that facade, they got caught.
Remember, they did get to the top, but they didn't quite stay there.
They didn't stay there.
But they got
That's a hole in the policy.
Getting to the top is one thing, staying there is another.
Yeah, how are you going to stay at the top if you've got to be so good all the
I
time?
won't be at the top. I said at the beginning I didn't want to be.
Yes, Chris, it's true.
If you follow these policies, you're not virtuous. You can choose to follow them. I could do that if I wanted to get to the top, and I think if I followed that, I would get to the top. But maybe I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. But I think in the pure sense, because most people are good, you can trick them with your Machiavellian facade.
That's
you
why
have an
you're on line
advantage
3.
over them. You have the upper hand. That's why it's sound.
The question is, if men are for the most part good, are Machiavelli's rules and general policy sound or unsound? On line 3, you say, if you want to succeed in a world in which most men are for the most part good, you will find it expedient to be bad sometimes, be bad to succeed. That's what line 3 says. and those of you who want to succeed or put yourself on line 3 are willing, according to Mark, to be bad. Is that correct?
Right.
That's what Mark. That's Mark's
Saying
point.
if it's
Yes,
expedient,
Buffy?
This is for my number 1.
Pardon me?
I'm number 1, and I'm not being swayed, so there. But anyway, if we're thinking about the business world where supposedly you have, this is where we want to succeed in, right? You
may
asked at the
want to.
beginning in
Not
our
everybody.
jobs
Not everybody.
what
I
we
want to be
do.
a philosopher.
Huh?
I don't want to succeed in business.
Well, that's your job as philosophy. But we decided that at the beginning, philosophy wasn't a job that you actually
Go
wanted
ahead.
to succeed
Go
in.
ahead,
But in most businesses, right? Most businesses are bad. I mean, that's kind of, you're being so ideal to think that big corporations are
Buffy,
good.
if this
I just don't think
if this
that.
film is exhibited before the members of the American Manufacturers Association, your name is Mud.
I'm not saying they're evil, but I know that most of them deal
Underhandedly.
underhandedly. And I'm not going to try to go into the world with closed eyes thinking everyone's going to love me and be nice to me and everything. Because, you know, then I would just be the most unsuccessful, poor, sad, you know,
Sherry?
to have a good life.
Okay, this is my conscience talking. I'd much rather say that for the most part people are bad so that I can succeed. I'd feel better about myself rather than saying for the most part people are good and I'm going to step on their toes.
So you're number 1, right?
I'm a number 1, and I'm saying that I feel better saying that y'all are deceiving yourselves to me by saying I'm for the most part good, but I'm going to step on people's toes, rather than saying you'd much rather
We're not
say
saying
hey,
you're
You're doing an evil
You're
by saying.
misconstruing our
you're
point.
doing-
You're changing around what we're
I
saying.
mean,
Sherry, I think Alan's got a point.
Yes.
You're saying that we're going to go out and just step on everybody that's good. If we can get to the top, we'll do anything to get there. And first of all, I didn't say I wanted to succeed in the rat race. That doesn't mean anything to me.
Oh, okay.
If I can succeed for
Oh, he's-
myself.
Dan and I were the only ones who got upper hands on that point.
He's copped
Yeah.
out now.
No, wait a second though. But I believe in number 3 still, that it's a sound thing. But that
Okay, then
that
you're
if I'm
not-
going to succeed in the rat race, that there's no way that you're ever going to get to the top. You're going to run into people who there's no way to get around. By being honest and virtuous, they'll cut you down because they're on line 1.
Right. So now
Okay,
you're
I see what
virtuous
you're
now
saying.
because
I'm not
you
going to
said
step
that
on
you
you
didn't
if
want
you're
to
straight
succeed.
up.
You just
Okay.
said you didn't want to succeed, so now that you're virtuous, because you've decided that you're not going to do that. But all
No,
these
I
other
didn't
people, they say they want to do it, because like Daryl over there, Daryl said, "Oh,
he's still saying, but
Wait a
his part,
second.
his
Wait,
stand is
wait,
what
wait,
I'm
wait,
against.
I have a quick. I'll just answer this. I will do number 3. Right. I'm not
No.
necessarily. I didn't necessarily say I wanted to succeed in the business world or whatever. But number 3 is the way things are going to go, whether you're in the business world or you're in any other
Anywhere.
thing. I think in your
Greg,
family.
Greg,
Okay.
Greg,
Mark, are you saying that you think that the good people should just let the so-called bad half just take over and
See,
succeed?
that doesn't
wait,
matter
wait.
to me. So you can't ask me that question because I said that-
Just don't.
Greg, Greg.
Okay, go ahead.
You're saying that, I mean, you should not, if you're gonna want to get ahead. You're gonna want to, buy
He
food.
said no. He said no. I'm sorry, Greg. At the very beginning, I have to say, Mark said he didn't want to be in the rat race. Success was not one of his ideals. In competition with others, he didn't want to compete.
Well, he's gonna want to eat. He's gonna want to eat. And so if he lets
I eat very well, and sorry, I eat very well, and don't get him.
if he lets everybody walk over him, then
He didn't say what
I can be a garbage man and eat. I'm not going to be a garbage man, but I can do something that satisfies me. I can still be in the business world and not compete. I can stay in my spot. The people can pass me all they want.
But I love to compete.
Hold it a second, Chris.
I think everyone's missed the question. I think that's laying in the gutter somewhere.
Would you repeat the
building? The question is, if most people are, for the most part, good, is his policy sound?
That is the question. That's what line 3
Now I think we're debating something else, or the morality of it.
It is easy to get off the point. Very easy to get off the point. And the point is that those of you on line, the 10 of you on line 3 are saying, even though, or not even though, but almost saying because most men are for the most part good, Machiavelli's policy of saying, always appear to be virtuous, but if you have to be not virtuous, be so if it's expedient. My next question is, which of the two superpowers do you think, listen to carefully, the Soviet Union or the United States is the more expert Machiavellian? The more, which you think?
I would say Soviet Union.
Soviet Union.
I'd say the United States.
I would say the United States because
Said the Soviet Union.
I'd say the Soviet Union.
And you?
United States.
I must tell you, in a seminar that I conducted in Aspen, that division of opinion is interesting. In a seminar I conducted in Aspen last summer, I had 30 members, a little larger than the seminar, 30 people around the table, of whom 12, a little less than half, were from abroad. They were from Far East, they're from Europe, they're from one from Africa. And the interesting thing is all the Americans around the table said they thought the Soviet Union was the more Machiavellian, and all the foreigners said they thought the United States was the more Machiavellian. Well, why did you say, who said the United States? Did you? Why?
Well, it just seems to me that the Soviet Union is more out in the open about everything they do, whereas we have almost the public fooled by a lot of the things we do.
Yes, what do you?
Well, I mean, if they say that the Soviet Union's out in the open about the things they do, you look at Afghanistan, they said that they were called in there to, help them.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, you could just listen to their broadcast and you can just tell they're...
Yes, Mark? Yes?
I would
Sandy?
say the United States because, the whole reason, or not reasoning, but feeling in the United States is that, Russia does all these bad things, all the spies.
We're
and
good and
everything.
they're bad.
Yeah, but
we,
if
we put on a great show of being virtuous. don't
there
we?
was an article on saying about all the spies and everything that the United States has, I think that if you went up to most people, let's say majority of people on the street and said, do you realize that we have this many spies and that all of this, they would probably say no.
Yeah.
So I think they've got everyone pretty well fooled.
What Lisa said and what you said about having the people fooled about what the government does, I think that's really a big problem because look at fairness in media. What's that? It's where the government has been attacked for telling lies. Now see, in the United States, we're free to be able to disagree, and in that sense, we know how many spies we have. In Russia, those people, they don't know anything. And it's better for your people to be on your side than the people in the superpowers. So I think they're more
I'm talking about the United States vis-a-vis one another in competition. They're both, each is trying to outdo the other. They're both trying to be the top. Yes, Laura?
Well, I don't know. Russia keeps slipping up, like with the plane that went over Russia and they shot it down, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they slip up a lot. We find
they're
out.
not as good as we are at being Machiavellian.
The world finds out a lot of things that they do, and
They don't find out what we do.
oh, they do, but not as much.
I see. Chris?
I think that the question is who is more expert, and we both do it. But I think in the implementation, Russia is a little more crude because they have something on their side that they're more of an enigma. Russia has always been that way, and that's sort of like a natural advantage. They don't have to do anything. They already have had a historical facade.
I see.
And the United States they do it with a little more finesse.
Mark, you had?
You said that all the Americans in the previous seminar picked the Soviet Union and all the foreigners picked...
Yeah.
Seems to me like they were saying that Machiavellian is worse than being less Machiavellian. More Machiavellian is being...
Well, we were not judging whether it's good or bad to be Machiavellian, but simply saying which was the more Machiavellian, the more expert Machiavellian.
Well, I just think it's kind of interesting the way all the Americans said that the Soviet saying that more Machiavellian was worse.
Yeah.
Because they obviously
they
think
didn't
that...
say worse. They simply said they thought that the Americans were more adept, more expert at being Machiavellian. Were better Machiavellians than the Russians. That's all they were saying.
Then they should say that
They weren't praising it now. They were simply
right, they were saying then they should say that the United States is more Machiavellian.
The foreigners said that.
The Americans. Because you just said that they thought
said
the
the
Americans were
Americans-
more adept at it.
I said,
which meant that...
Let me show now. I reported the following thing. I said that in that seminar, the division of opinion was as follows. The European, the non-American, the foreigners in the seminar thought that the Americans, in their foreign policy, were more Machiavellian than the Russians. The Americans thought the Soviet Union was more Machiavellian than the United States. Is that clear? Yes.
I think whether one is more when I said I thought the Soviet Union was more Machiavellian, I was thinking more in terms of, well, they've got all their people fooled, thinking that they're doing all the righteous things.
I was thinking...
But as far as United States to Soviet Union, yes, we're much more adept at covering up all the little scams than they are.
I
But as
see.
far as the Soviet Union to their people and the United States to our
I
people,
see.
I would question why we're continuing to use Machiavellian means at that level. I mean, why does the United States want to be on top over the Soviet Union? Why can't we just coexist together peacefully? We're not trying to achieve a good end, and a good end justifies the means. So
Good end.
the means do not need to be justified.
Justify the means, because good end, the only kind of means that can be used for a good end are good means.
Right, but the United States and the Soviet Union both trying to be the top world power is not a good end. So I don't understand
And
why.
even if one could conquer the other, we couldn't live that way.
Would you all look at page 92, the second paragraph in chapter 18. I want to read that to you, and then I want to read you something else, because I think these extraordinary statements will give you an understanding of war and peace that you may never have had before. And most of us, I think, are wrongly taught in school about what war is and what peace is, and it's very important in this world to understand the nature of war and peace. Machiavelli says, the opening of that second paragraph as follows: "You must know then that there are two methods of fighting, the one by law, the other by force. The first method is that of men, the second of beasts. But as the first method is often insufficient, one must have recourse to the second. It is therefore necessary for the prince to know well how to use both the beast and the man." That is Machiavelli. Many centuries before, Cicero, the great Roman statesman, senator, wrote these words. Almost, just think how close to what Machiavelli said this statement by Cicero is. Cicero says, "There are two ways of settling disputed questions, one by discussion, the other by force. The first being characteristic of man, the second of brutes. We should have recourse to the latter, the use of force, only if the former fails." And then many centuries, see, Machiavelli's in the 15th century. In the 17th century, 2 centuries later, John Locke, a political philosopher that we will read sometime, said, there are two, think of how parallel these statements are. There are two sorts of contests among men, the one managed by law, the other by force, and they are of such a nature that where the one ends, the other always begins. In other words, when men are in conflict about anything, whether in a family, or in the state, or in world affairs, there are two ways of settling their disputes. If they can be settled by conversation, by talk, or by law, wherever it is possible to settle a dispute by talk, conversation, negotiations, or law, you have peace. When that method fails, as all three men says, then you have to resort, if the conflict is serious enough and you can't get what you want any other way, you resort to force. So war begins when the method of peace fails, the method of peace being to solve the conflict by talk, conversation, negotiation, or law. And those three statements, one by Cicero, one by Machiavelli, and by Locke, are the great statements on that point. Thank you very much. Let me begin by calling your attention to some new points of method that came out today. Something I did with Machiavelli you should always do when possible. That is, the book, for this purpose, we are not interested in the book as a historical document. Scholars would discuss it in its significance in relation to the reign of the Medicis, Florence, the unification of Italy, what Machiavelli's role was in that, and would discuss it in terms of, most of his language is in terms of how princes get power. That is not of interest to these children, or anybody else, as a matter of fact. We're concerned with our own lives, and the book speaks to that. If you make them do what I did at the beginning, say, write a title that will show its general significance, not how do you gain power as a prince and keep power, but how do you succeed in any competitive venture in which you're struggling to get to the top over other people? That first step is indispensable. If you do any discussion of Machiavelli that didn't do that at the beginning would lose its main significance. And by the way, I did that at the beginning in this case because if you got started the wrong way, you'd never get back on the right track. But in other cases, you wouldn't do it at the beginning, but you always want to be sure that the book is read and discussed as if it were a contemporary document, as if it were written yesterday, regardless of whether it's Greek, Latin, medieval, or anything else. That is different from scholarly readings of books. This is the point of these books are being used only for the sake of getting a discussion of basic ideas and issues out, and they ought to be of obvious contemporary relevance. Point two, you have now seen in 3 seminars the importance of the opening question. I can't overemphasize it enough. If you don't have the right opening question or questions, it will not go. If you start on the wrong foot, it's hard to get back on the right foot. And the most important planning the teacher must do to run the seminar by reading the books to think about what opening question will catch everybody. What opening question can I ask that will get everybody in? What opening question will they all have to give an answer to? What opening question might they contribute to or disagree about? You saw there were 2 or 3 opening questions today, but as there were yesterday and as there were in the case of Plato. Opening questions, never more than 3, 2 or sometimes 1 even. If you keep in mind that you can imagine the kind of answers you're going to get to that opening question, and therefore you can begin to think in advance of the follow-up questions you will ask when you get those answers. 3, the opening question is only part of it. The other thing you ought to have in mind is what kind of closing questions you want for the seminar. In between is easy. The opening questions bring out answers, then you've got to ask questions about those answers. But when you've exhausted that, then think about what kind of questions would be good roundup questions, closing questions, things that, again, tie it all together. That is the technique of preparing the seminar in terms of the questions you ask. Now, there's one more point. The diagrams I used yesterday, the diagrams I used, sometimes they're very simple, but they're almost always a diagram, as these are, which, as you look at them, are totally unintelligible. I mean, when people come into the classroom or sit down at the seminar, those are hieroglyphics on the board, and they're intended to be. No point in writing it. You don't want them to read the diagram. You don't want them to be able to read the diagram. The diagram must become significant only after you start to use it and begin to point to it and say what the words mean, you see. The letters on the board are meant to be unintelligible, meaningless, and you'd lose the point if they can read it and say, try to understand it. They mustn't try. The diagram must become operative only when you start to use it, as I did when it became necessary to. And the diagrams are terribly important because obviously I control most of that discussion with that diagram. And I use that diagram to sort of sum up something, you see, because they then focus the attention of everybody on an issue. And that's what you want. Is that clear? Well, what are your questions?
What about the parent groups, the observers who keep us under constant scrutiny, who really don't seem to want their children to think about ideas, concepts?
They will give us what they gave Socrates, the hemlock. But our duty is to take it. We, the good teachers, are the subverters of society. I mean, teaching is a subversive activity. We have to take the consequences of that. We expect our school board to protect us against those fellows. They don't, that's too bad too.
Along the same line of teachers, I was most interested to see that on your second question, or maybe it was your first question, what future professions do you see yourself in? Yeah. The very first one that popped up with no competition was teaching. And I don't have a question, I just thought that was
interesting, wasn't it?
Very interesting to see.
I thought that was, I really thought that discussion was excellent. They really had their hearts and souls in that one.
Another interesting observation, Greg began to model you.
he was trying to control the questions.
Yeah.
And he said, if not twice, he might have said it 3 times, that was not the point.
That's right.
I'll repeat the question to you. And that was most interesting because that was after 2 days.
That's right.
He was beginning to want to be the moderator.
But don't you think, you've seen 3 days, the books are uneven, of course. Some are more, yesterday was a more difficult text and it required a more difficult exercise of the mind. But don't you think if you see a little improvement in them in terms of their relation to one another around the table? Now imagine them having gone through 10 or 12 or 15 of these, what they'd be like at the end of that. Imagine for a whole year, how they'd come out in June if they started in September. That's what you've got to imagine, you see.
I talked to Tim just a few minutes ago, and he said he read his physics last night, and he said how much easier it was just having gone through these 3 sessions.
Really?
Yes. I told you yesterday, you know, I think all of this is really...
I didn't, that's interesting, very interesting indeed.
I think, yeah, it seems obvious to me that all of this is really reading.
Oh, it is, obviously.
And Tim verified that in reading his physics last night, it was much clearer than it had ever been before.
That's very
because he felt that
interesting
he really...
You see, I am firmly convinced that the way to teach reading is this way. I mean, if you try to give a course in reading, you wouldn't get the same result. It's taught incidentally, you see. You're not doing it, yet actually it's happening all the time, you see.
I was surprised that you didn't take the opportunity today when the group divided about 50-50 and 10 or 11 were willing to give up their virtue
to succeed,
be successful. Why you didn't bring up the fact that most of them tended to agree with Aristotle yesterday about virtue being the only good, and the only way you could lose one's virtue was to, in essence, to give it away. Yet they were quite willing to do that today.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, you're quite right. I missed the opportunity, and normally I think in Aspen, the seminar on Machiavelli immediately follows a seminar on Plato, and I once say, now what bearing has Machiavelli on Plato? I have not done that. I mean, in an ordinary, if you had these students, let's say over a period of time, one of the rules would be always to pick up something that happened yesterday or the day before, or the various seminars, and connect it. You're quite right. I should have done it and didn't do it. It's a very good point.
Today was certainly a lively discussion. As a seminar leader, though, if you had these students all year, at what point would you become worried about the non-participants? There were still today, unless you spoke directly, like when you asked the question about give me the title of the book or et cetera, there were still about 3 that did not come in. Or is that enough, that direct question?
No, obviously some of them are more articulate than others. Some of them are more forward than others. Some of them are more willing and anxious to speak than others. And I respect that difference. I wouldn't be bothered by the fact that some hold back. I would, if anyone remained sullenly silent and obviously disinterested, showed no interest in taking the text, I'd want to take that fellow outside or that girl outside. The most important point, however, you see is what a good time they're having. That means they look forward to it. In other words, that business of having a good time assures you that you'll have no trouble in getting them to read the books and taking part. They find it an exciting, interesting experience.
I noticed the absence of organized Christian beliefs coming in. Had that come up when you were talking about the good and the evil and the bad and the wrong, how would you have handled that?
I would have said, according to Christian theology, for example, I was on the point of doing it, then I forgot about it. The question, when they said that men are good or bad, and I asked the question about nature and nurture, the Christian doctrine, of course, of original sin is that they're born bad. They're born predisposed to evil, and only by God's grace are they rectified. But I didn't do that because I thought we'd get off a little bit, but sometimes I have done that. I would say, according to the Christian view, we are not born morally neutral, we're born morally evil. We are all tainted with original sin. That's according to the Christian view. I wouldn't say who is Christian, I wouldn't get them in the spot on that, but I'd simply announce that and let it go. for the most part, they took the opposite to the Christian view.
Yes, it is.
They said that they thought that it was mostly by nurture that people were good or bad, not by nature. Didn't they say that?
After a year, this group, if you worked with them once a week, how would they be different?
I think the most obvious thing is your point. They would read better. They would speak better. They would address their minds to issues more clearly. They would define the issues. They'd be more careful in the use of words. They'd be better students all around. They'd be thinking students as opposed to non-thinking students. And I can't think of any other result you want. Yes?
If I went back home and tried to start learning how to be a seminar leader, I remember one thing you said when you came to our school the day that you interviewed these students, and you said every teacher should have a bell that rings 30 minutes through the period, and they should stop lecturing at that point and have discussion.
Right.
If I tried to take the last 30 minutes of the
20 minutes.
period, 20 minutes of the period, excuse me, I'm overambitious. If I took the last 20 minutes and just attempted to discuss even what had been lectured
That's
upon
right,
that
that's
day,
right.
would that help me
Yes, it would.
get started?
Yes, it would, absolutely. In other words, if you added 20 minutes of discussion to every didactic 50 minutes, or didactic 30 minutes, and the questions raised were about what was said by you or by them, what you want to do is to encourage them to ask you questions as well as you asking them questions. You want to encourage them, not just to be answerers, but you ought to say, let's start, I've now finished. Have you any questions to ask me? The hard thing is, since most of them are they like to sit there silently, is to get them to talk. But to begin with, you ought to, you'll say, if you don't ask me questions, I'll ask you questions, see? So you better ask me questions, and then you got it going. That is it. That at least begins that way, you see? So you can begin that way. Yes?
I am really surprised at your answer to his question about how the students would be different, in that you didn't mention they would be better citizens, they would have a more highly developed moral sense. It seems to me that's the exciting thing that's going on.
Yes, obviously they'd be better citizens, because they'd be thinking citizens, just as a thinking student is a better student, so a thinking citizen is a better citizen, obviously.
One of the methods that you use beautifully that I've been very impressed with because I have a hard time using it is silence. The kids are very comfortable with it. They don't get uncomfortable. Yesterday's session, there were a couple of times that there was too much silence, I thought, and I thought the kids are going to become uncomfortable and squirmy. They didn't at all. And then the thoughts that came out were wonderful.
That's right. Well, I often fail to do that because I'm impatient, and I often hurry it along, but I can control myself and be silent, which I think you're quite right. It's very useful.
Was today difficult for you when they were all talking?
No.
Well, one particular person, Mark, took things very personally for a while today. Did you want to jump in and... No. I did.
No, I didn't. No, I let it go. It's going along fine.
You even came to his defense
That's
at one
right.
time on this.
Because he was making a point the others weren't seeing. No, he was very, very good today. Very good indeed. And he was remembering, you see, that all of them said, yes, they wanted to succeed. They were trying to get out of it toward the end. They all were much more vocal, much more, shall I say, on the ball today than they were the first 2 days. And that would go on, increase. But the most important thing for you to recognize is not only the fact that they enjoyed it, but they go on discussing it, and they will go on discussing it for a long time, you see. It's what goes on after the seminar that's just as important as the seminar. They will walk out of a classroom and have nothing to discuss at all. It's dead. They walk out of this room and they're just buzzing their heads off out there. Now, that is what you must understand. That's the payoff.